find the heading just before, we have these 6-hour time periods. So the columns are the day, in this case, today being Friday in this forecast, the weather, the amount in inches, that would be of snowfall, the temperature, that's the air temperature, and air temperature is taken 5 feet above the ground in a natural surrounding. The road temperature, also in Fahrenheit, and that is the surface ground temperature, which is very important to our clients. And then we have wind, both sustained and gusts. Below that, we have special notes to amplify our message. A lot of times people don't read everything, so we highlight what's important or add something that wouldn't be in one of those columns.
And as far as the air temperature as concerned, as far as it being recorded, does that incorporate wind chill into that temperature?
Wind chill is a calculated amount figure of heat transfer based on how human beings react. This is the actual temperature that we mentioned on the thermometer.
And again, on the bottom portion of this page, again, if we could walk through, we're looking for
tomorrow. So since this was issued at 8 p.m. on Friday, tomorrow is Saturday. And we're going through each 6-hour period and how much snowfall could be expected. You see it starts with 3 or 4 inches and then ramps up as we get later in the morning to as much as 6 to 10 inches of snow. And you can calculate what that hourly rate might be based on the 6-hour period. We give that type of range because it's scientifically accurate. People really want to know every minute, every hour, and that's just not something that modern science can do. So we give this period to be as accurate as possible while still being extremely precise. 7 to 9 inches during the afternoon period, and then it winds down to 2 to 3 inches toward midnight.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Gilman, you can take that down. Now, Mr. Gilman, the snow accumulation, how is that measured as far as the measurements that you get from each of these 3 sites? How is that measured at those sites?
At Blue Hill Observatory, there's often an observer, a trained observer, making measurements. The standard is to use what we call a snowboard. And if any of the members of the jury do weather observing or no weather observers, you might be familiar. It's just like a piece of plywood, something that doesn't radiate like pavement would or a house would. Just something that would allow the snowfall to accumulate in a natural way. And then that's cleaned off every 3 hours. And those amounts are added throughout the duration of the snowfall event. So that's the way the observers at the Blue Hill Observatory literally have been doing that since 1885. When you come to Logan Airport, you don't have an observer right there. There was back in before the 70s, 80s, around that time period, before ASOS came into play. There were people that were in the weather office that would go out and make those measurements. Now they contract with an observer. And I'm not sure the location right now or during this event in 2022. I believe it may be in Winthrop, but it's very nearby to Logan Airport. And this is a contract observer that makes these measurements. At NORAD, there is no snowfall measurement made right at that location.
Now, you used the term a couple times as far as heavy snow. What is scientifically, what do you mean by heavy snow?
Heavy snow snow definitely occurred in the snow. Yeah, I've heard it referred to as and it's somewhat in the eye of the beholder, but I would say yes, whiteout conditions did occur.
Turning your attention, Mr. Gilman, now to the topic of visibility. Can you describe to the jury what your understanding of that term applies to what you do?
Well, visibility is just a reduction of how far you can see based on some weather. We're talking about weather. So haze can reduce visibility, fog, different types of precipitation, smoke can reduce visibility in the air. But in terms of snowfall, the heavier the intensity of the snowfall, the lower the visibility.
And so from a meteorological standpoint, how is that measured?
So it's measured in miles, or quarters of a mile, which is the standard here in the United States. Sometimes eighths of a mile, but generally with these, it would be 3/4 of a mile or half a mile, or as the snow lightened up quite a bit, it may go up to 7 miles. I've seen snow falling 10, even 11 miles visibility, which you'd hardly notice if you were out. That's not much of a reduction in visibility, but it can come all the way down.
And what was the lowest, if you know, the lowest recorded measurement as far as visibility as you can?
I would base that on the fluid airflow because especially in this area, and they do a good job of measuring visibility, and that came down to a quarter of a mile at the airport. It certainly may have been lower than that at times, on the order of a quarter to as low as 3/8 mile between observations.
Now, sir, if I could turn your attention to the topic of temperature. How is temperature measured in your analysis as far as the data that you have?
Temperature is measured with a thermometer, and there are different types. We depend heavily on electronic thermometers now. Measure the amount of heat in the air, and we get a reading, and we generally use that reading as the air temperature.
What is the difference between air temperature and road temperature?
Again, air temperature, the standard is the temperature of the atmosphere 5 feet above the ground in a well-ventilated natural surroundings. Road temperature, ground temperature is actually at the surface. So it's out beyond the atmosphere, right at the surface of the ground.
What kind of tools are used or utilized to measure road temperature?
There are basically two ways. One way would be to put some kind of sensing device, a probe, in the surface, just below the surface. The other way would be to use infrared radiation, so mount a sensor on a pole, and that infrared wavelength measurement to give you road temperature or surface temperature.
You mentioned earlier in your testimony that road temperature in particular is important to your client. Why is that?
And I've heard this so many times from our clients. seasonal freezing ground typically happens in this climate in the midwinter that our ground freezes. So if you look a few days before, you get a good sense if that was the case. I mean, there have been winters, there have been months of January in recent years that we've reached 60, 70 degrees. Nothing is going to be frozen during that time. This was not the case in late January of 2022. It was an unusually cold period, and it was important to.
Can you describe to the courier the layout of the temperature readings throughout that period of time that you entered?
Yes. I'll start with the 26th. On this, it was pretty steady to around 2 in the morning. And then because of the nature of this type of storm, it's deepening rapidly, it's low pressure offshore, so the wind tends to to the north-northeast, to the north. And that backing wind starts to draw air rather than from the Gulf of Maine, the Atlantic Ocean, the harbor, from northern New England and Quebec. So all of these winter storms tend to get colder as the storm intensifies. And that's what we see happen as you get toward 2:30 in the morning, and especially 4:30, it's down to 28, 26, and then down to 24 degrees just before 6 in the morning.
That temperature sort of fluctuation or lack thereof, is that consistent with what you would expect in this type of storm?
It's exactly what I would expect, and this is a classic winter nor'easter, and that temperature drop.
And lastly, sir, if I could just take you back to the road temperature you were talking about before. How would you describe the temperature readings generally from the 26th through the 29th as far as what type of temperatures were recorded during that time frame that you just testified about?
As I said, it's the coldest time of the year anyway in late January here in the Boston area around Canton, midwinter. And this particular year of 2022, it was colder than normal. So road temperatures were dropping much of the time. They may have come up a little bit during the course of the day, thanks to sunshine during the 26th and 27th. A little moderation in the temperature on the 28th, but for the most part, there was a frost in the ground, the soil was frozen, and the temperature was unusually cold at the middle of winter.
And what impact would that have on the hardness of the ground over that time period?
Well, again, the ground was frozen, the soil was frozen, and the surface hard as, too difficult. You wouldn't be able to dig in the ground.
Thank you very much, sir. I have nothing further on.
All right, Mr. Alessi? Yes. Show Mr. Lally, please.
With regard to Mr. Lally and myself, we have agreed I'd like to address the court with a stipulation, and with regard to the document we stipulated into evidence, text matters.
Yes, Your Honor, may we approach this very briefly?
Okay.
With that error correct?
No.
What would it be?
As I said, there's 1.2 inches up to 3 a.m., and then we're really
After weather, I have a few more questions.
prior.
The 28th.
Wind chill.
Next witness.
Thank you. The Commonwealth recalls Nick Garino. Your Honor, I'll inform this will be the last recall for Mr. Garino.
Thank you.
defendant to Jen McCabe.
Could you kindly read that and explain it to the jury?
With all the information on it.
Yeah.
This is from the defendant to Jen McCabe, 7:26 a.m. on the 29th. It says, can you send me Kerry's number?
Thank you. Can you further create an extraction?
I'm sorry, Ms. It's from Jen McCabe to the defendant.
And what does it say?
Can you send me Kerry's number?
What time and date?
That is 7:26:52 a.m. April 29th, 2022.
Did you do a further extraction report from Jonathan's phone with text messages between him and a person named Kaylee?
Yes, I did.
And you recognize that?
Yes. It's the 12:34:09 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered. 12:34:38 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered. 12:35:09 a.m., the defendant calls John. Not answered. 12:35.
At Meadow Gas, smoke that night.
Yes, at 12:36:39 a.m., the defendant's phone auto-connects to the Wi-Fi Hatspam 123.
Are you familiar with the router at Mr. O'Keefe's home?
I have not done a look at it in person, but that's the known network that's listed under it. To Hatspam 123 and O'Keefe 74.
Did
Two
you
names.
learn the range that a connection must be in order to connect to his router?
Yes, so depending on the router, it's either a 2.4 gigahertz or a 5 gigahertz radio band, or signal band, I should say. Depending on which one it's connecting to, which band, it's either 150-foot indoor range or up to 300 feet outdoor. So, again, when you pull into your home, sometimes you can still be connected to your home Wi-Fi in the driveway. Yes, 12:36:39.